welcome once again to The Law Matters. Of course it does. Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, your host and moderator. As we tell you, this program has been created to educate, inform, and help you decide how to help yourself, protect your business and your family with all things related to the law. We provide information and resources that will help you decide whether or not you actually might want to handle some issues yourself. If you do decide to seek outside professional counsel, you'll be better prepared, and so will the professional who you select. Our goal, as always, is to help save you time, money, and achieve the best possible results. So we always want to welcome and thank Attorney David Bizarre from the Bizarre & Associates law firm in East Providence, who continues to weigh in on our topics, provide legal information, and some wonderful anecdotes from time to time, too. So today, it's a new day, and there are new laws taking effect in 2021. As years change, so do the rules we live by, and 2020 was no exception. It wreaked havoc, plenty of havoc, on just about everyone. According to multiple news sources, probably every news source, 2020 saw massive protests over police brutality, economic insecurity because of the pandemic, extreme weather events, which signaled that there certainly are major issues, great gravity with the climate crisis. So across the country, state legislators and local jurisdictions have been trying to respond to that. So today, whether we're talking about new IDs or police reform or reusable shopping bags or sunscreen that's barred in Hawaii, to family law and wage increases, there are plenty of laws that have been changed in just a short period of time. And there's also President Biden's 25 executive orders to date. He's off to quite a start. So David, let's start with explaining what's the difference between a president coming in and having executive orders passed versus laws as we know them.
So typically a law is developed through the Congress. We're talking about federal laws,
yes,
where either the House or the Senate will introduce a bill. If it gets passed through their committees and then by the whole body, it goes to the other house. So if the Senate introduced it, it goes to the House. If the House passes it in some form or fashion that's similar, it may have to go through what's called a reconciliation, where they make sure that the bills have the correct information from both chambers. It then goes to the president, who will either sign it into law, veto it, or we've seen some presidents who've done a pocket veto, where they're out of session and they don't sign it, it goes away. But in any event, that's how a law generally is made. And the benefit of doing that is there's negotiation usually, and one side who may be more liberal has some take on what the law should be, another side that might be more conservative has another take, and you generally get to a consensus that will pass. This is at least how it all used to be done. And the bill is then presented to the president, who's got a pretty good piece of legislation that becomes the law when he signs it. Executive orders don't go through that process, and they're not the law, so to speak. It's not a federal law, but it's a presidential executive order, and the president is the chief executive officer of the executive branch of the government, and a lot of what happens is through the executive branch of the government. And so as the chief executive officer, he can issue these orders to say, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. So for example, immigration's handled through the Department of Homeland Security, and when President Trump was the president, he issued certain executive orders to say, this is how we're going to handle these situations. And of course, some of those were challenged to say, well, does he have authority as the head of that agency, as the head of the executive branch, to issue rules and regulations as to how they're going to handle things? Or is that stepping over into the legislative area where it has to come through Congress? And certain things you can do by executive order, and if they're challenged and you can do it, then the court says, no, he had the authority to do that. And if he didn't, they say, no, that executive order doesn't pass muster. So President Biden has taken to, well, some of these executive orders that were issued, I don't agree with, and if he could do it to put them in place, I can do it to undo them. And so that's actually before Trump even, Obama and presidents before had really started to go more towards issuing these executive orders to put rules in place. I think it was Obama who did it with the DACA rules and Dreamers and all of that, and then Trump undid that, and Biden is trying to maybe put some of that back in place. And of course, the right answer is the best rules and laws would come out of a consensus built out of the legislature, and that's what we would like to get back to. But it's been so contentious and so difficult, and people not trying to work together but work against each other, that the process of using executive orders has become more and more and more in place because nothing else is getting done otherwise.
Good commentary, and thank you for the points of fact. So as we've gone through this, even with what you're saying right now, that legislative process, that process takes time. Give and take, conservative, liberal, back and forth, rewrites, executive order. As every president incoming says, on day one, I'm going to, whatever he's going to do, executive orders, 25 for Mr. Biden to date, some that started actually day one. It certainly makes sense that some things are important enough that day one is where it needs to happen. But with what's happened over this past year, 2020, there was such havoc, there was so much stress, so much trouble, that apparently the local legislatures did start to enact legislation that would go in effect as of January 1 or close to that time. And across the country, I guess one of the biggest, dominating the legislative cycle was everything to do with police reform. I don't know that it was necessarily just and only George Floyd in Minneapolis when that all happened, but it certainly, well, we know, caused havoc in every state. Pandemic, at times thrown to the wind as that goes. So police reform is supposed to be enacted. Let's talk about what is actually likely to be a change in regulation, what's a law, and what should actually change. Is it really going to make a difference? So when people were taking to the streets demanding that things just aren't right, the police are bad. They're not bad, but whatever. So what kinds of laws can you think of that make sense relative to some of the ones I'm going to mention here that aren't necessarily so reasonable? Thoughts on the laws that have changed?
Sure. There were a lot of talk about defunding the police, and that's not an answer, to be honest. What some states did do in response to that was to reallocate funds from the police that would have gone to certain enforcement things, say perhaps, but to other more social services related things that actually have worked really well so far. And those types of things, this isn't one of them that I know of for sure, but an example of what it might be is domestic violence going in with just police and, maybe not diffusing a situation or diffusing it, whereas you might have some counseling and other things that can be brought into that situation, that type of thing. So the use of funds in helping police do their jobs and doing it more effectively is a better way to look at it than calling it defunding the police. It's not what you should be trying to do. Reallocating to do a better job, for the police to be able to do a better job. That's one area. Another area is what are the police, what should they be allowed to do or not allowed to do in doing their job? And so the chokeholds have become a big issue. Do we need to allow police to use chokeholds and potentially kill somebody in the course of doing their job? Police need to be protected. They need to be able to do their job in a way that is safe for them and safe for the public around them. And there's always have been things that we've looked at and have changed, and the police departments themselves have put some of these things in. For example, high-speed police chases. Was it the Wild West at one time? And, you would just go as quick as you can, public be damned, and the police departments looked at it. That wasn't safe for the public, and it wasn't safe for their officers. So they put rules in regarding what you could do for high-speed chases. They've got rules in place that they had, legislatures have put in place about use of chokeholds. And there's training that the police departments will need to do and to be able to both protect the police officer and the public.
And so, for example, in the state of Connecticut, there's legislation that includes some affirmative action, diversity in selection of police officers, making sure there isn't too many small-town chiefs that have not had the sense of diversity that their various communities now represent. But how about something as interesting as requiring officers to undergo mental health screenings every 5 years? If that's legislated, impact? I'm not sure. One visit every 5 years, they don't have to happen all at once. And I'm not sure with some of them that say 1 hour of sensitivity training or whatever. Is that a meaningful change as much as one that they did suggest, which is every police officer, unless they're undercover, needs to wear a badge and be able to say, here's my name and my badge number.
Right.
That seems legitimate so that they're justified in their position and what they're going to be doing.
So the training about understanding differences is not, it's a good thing.
Sure.
Because people look at the world from the lens that they grew up in, their perspective, their point of view. It's all based on their experience. And not everybody has had the same experience. And so it's not just police officers or law enforcement, it's everybody. So to have some training and understanding, and here's the thing, given the climate that we just came through with how we listen to each other, and really more importantly, don't listen to each other.
True.
And don't communicate and don't sit back and take a minute to hear what someone else is saying, combined with not understanding where other people are coming from because it's your life experience and you don't have theirs. So just to be able to understand that and to take the police and what they need to do in interacting with the community in general, it's really, there's no downside. There's only an upside for people to be able to understand how other people think, why people may come from something from a different point of view or different perspective, and to understand other people's thinking. We used to call it standing in someone else's shoes for a little while. Well, to have some training to be able to put those shoes on is actually a good thing. Mental health counseling every 5 years, I kind of think this. It's a very stressful job that a police officer has to do every day. Some days worse than others. There will be some incidents where any person who's gone through that incident may have post-traumatic stress disorder or some kind of effect on them and may want to speak to somebody, and maybe the department should have a program from not the legislative perspective, but from the department's rules and regulations. You've gone through this, you have to speak to someone. I'm sure many do because I have seen it on TV.
Yes, we have.
So I would hope departments have not only that available to their employees, but also required, giving uncertain circumstances, that they have to go through that.
I mean, everybody talks about safety and security. We've been talking about relative to the pandemic, but certainly, as to your point, the officers need to be safe. The people who they are interacting with need to be safe. And so many of these laws, proposed laws, reactionary or not, are geared towards or planning to address security issues. Back in 9/11, we were told that as a result of that, we now need to have better security, airport security even, which I think was part of the Real ID, the new IDs that are happening. So you're going to go to the airport next month and visit your children in Florida, and gee, David, your license may not be enough. Well, as of last October, I believe they were supposed to have all of those Real IDs all the driver's license converted to Real IDs. Pandemic happened, that changed.
So I think it got pushed off for a year. So I think it's October of this year. And what the government said was states, in order for their state-issued IDs, licenses or identification cards, must follow certain rules in affirming that the person who's being identified is the person who's being identified. So there's a much more stringent set of documents and requirements that you have to do when you renew your license to get a real ID. And if you don't get the real ID, starting in October of 2021, your old state identification or driver's license won't be enough to get you through the airport. You'll need a passport or military ID or some other kind of federal accepted identification.
So, not that you necessarily want to get on a plane right now, David, but if you were going to get on a plane in PVD, in Providence, and even head out to California. California, as I understand it, has had the real ID since 2012, but of course they have a different way of doing business. Does that mean if you landed in California with your regular driver's license issued from Rhode Island, when you get back on that plane, you don't have the star on your, well, maybe you do, but if you don't have that star on your driver's license, does this mean that when you're traveling, you better plan on taking that passport if you have one, or are you going to be in trouble?
Until October of 2021, you won't be, because it's federal law. It's not states that regulate what you need to get onto a plane. It's the TSA and Homeland Security and the federal rules that say what you need. And so that doesn't go into effect, as I understand it. It was delayed 1 year. It was supposed to be October of 2020. And so most states, Rhode Island I know for sure because I had to go through it to get mine, have been doing it for a while. And so when I renewed my license a while ago, they said you don't have to do this, but you're going to have to at some point in time, and at that point it was before October of 2020, so you may as well do it now and get it done right. And so it's not whether California has had it or Rhode Island is just getting it or some states haven't even figured it out yet. It's the federal law.
It's federally mandated. Thank you. And a point of clarification, I'd misspoken when I said that California had it since 2012. Actually, it was Georgia that had it as 2012. California became compliant in 2018, but both of those dates are obviously ahead of Rhode Island and I think Mass also, but at least everyone's heading in that direction.
Well, Rhode Island, you've been able to get it for some time.
You could get it, but it wasn't that we had to have it done, and I think now there's more of a push to do that, even though the registry is having some backup.
Its own issues.
Yes. So affecting 2021 minimum wage. President Biden, of course, would like to see $15 an hour across every state. May take time. Massachusetts has already increased to $13.50, I believe. Rhode Island, what's afoot with us for getting a little upping of the ante?
There's a lot of state, so there's federal minimum wage, and every state can impose their own minimum wage. California just upped it to $14.
They're ahead of everyone.
Yep. And a lot of states have done some smaller increases, or some as much as $1. I think that's California went from 13 to 14. So here's the thing, and we don't want to ever get political, but if you have a COVID relief plan, and it's not going to go through that legislative process that we talked about before, but through a different process called a Budget Reconciliation Act, it's probably not where a $15 an hour minimum wage law would belong. It probably would have to get peeled out and put in separately.
Does just about everyone meet that $7.25 federal minimum? Apparently there were something like 20 states that still have wages that low. Is that something that's really realistic, that would say that other states will be able to linger longer at that low wage?
If the federal law went to 15?
Yeah.
No, that's part of the problem is some of those states would be almost doubling, or if not doubling, what their minimum wage is. And that can be, it's a tricky issue because there are two sides to every equation. And do people deserve to make a living wage? Yes. What is a living wage in California, especially San Francisco and Los Angeles, may not be the same as what it is in Missouri, or some rural state where things are less expensive. And so how does that, well, why can't everybody make that, and why shouldn't everyone make that? Well, someone has to pay it.
That's the other side of
And
it.
that, when I say there's two sides to every equation, you know what? If it's a nationwide big company that makes money in every state, and it makes as much money in a rural state as it makes in California, then they probably ought to be paying that kind of wage because they can afford to pay it. But if it's a small, independent, locally owned company that is selling what they're selling out of their little storefront and couldn't do it if they had to pay $15 an hour, well, bear that in mind.
Right, so so many businesses had struggled, have gone out because of the pandemic, and if they're just hanging on by their fingernails now, to suddenly have any kind of increase, especially a substantial one, might be enough to put them over the top. And that's not withstanding any changes that additional COVID relief might afford them. It's still going to be a problem.
It's difficult, yeah. And for every action, there's a reaction. And I would love to see everybody be able to make at least $15 an hour. And I think it's a worthy goal to try to get to. I just worry about those people who have struggled and maybe didn't get PPP money the first time around and may not qualify for it the second time around and are trying to keep their people working. And how would it affect that business? That's what I worry about.
And on another front, we were talking about employment. Also, education is a very big issue. We had addressed how some schools can and cannot have their teachers return and have in-school learning. But at the higher education level, there are lots of changes afoot. Of course, we who are familiar with the Pell Grants, certainly that's been impacted already, and it will be helping those who are even at the junior college level, some who are struggling to pay their rent, never mind pay back their student loans. Care to address that?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different conversations and things around college tuitions and the affordability. Some states have even taken to trying to encourage people to start saving right when children are born, putting a little bit of money aside.
The $50 or something for
everyone
child
who's born. Yeah. And many states have right along had different plans. We have 529 plans. Florida has a plan where you can pay money in and be guaranteed tuitions paid for at one of their state colleges. There's a lot of different states that have approached it in different ways. She's still Governor Raimondo, but perhaps former Governor Raimondo addressed it in Rhode Island with her plan for free tuition for the first 2 years or so of school, or however she put it in. I know she'd like it to be more. So there are things that have been done and are being done. I know that the federal government is probably going to look at what to do about student loans.
I think that a couple of other issues, while we're in Black History Month and we're focusing on that, apparently under the banner of Pell Grants, they're looking to make sure that those who are disadvantaged, say many in the Black community have not been able to have access to Pell Grants, or if they had been incarcerated for some minor drug offense or who knows what, they've been ineligible for Pell Grants. Apparently, new legislation afoot allows them to have that mantle lifted so that at least they'll have access to it. And while the next stage of those who are in high school have to fill out that financial FAFSA, the financial declaration, apparently there's also legislation to make that a simpler document, 36 questions, that may now make it a lot easier for people to fill it out and, more importantly, qualify for the Pell Grants.
Yeah, so those are all important things, and they all touch on different issues. But the bottom line is you should be encouraging people who maybe have had minor drug charges in the past, who want to change their life and turn it around by getting a college education. Why wouldn't we want that to happen? And why wouldn't we want to make it fair and equal to everybody? So those are all important issues to look at and address.
And here, Rhode Island and in Massachusetts, families have been impacted as of 2021 in a good way. In Rhode Island, there is not another definition, but there's certainly been an archaic description of what a family is and who's entitled to make decisions for their family. So the once traditional birth-only families, if you aren't in that category, of which there are many who aren't, have been denied access to records, to making decisions for their children, and have had to go through hoops. So as of 2021, in Rhode Island at least, there is a new definition that I guess it includes 9 different categories, from adoption to sperm donations to the LGBTQ, excuse me, those who are adopting kids. They've had problems now being able to help their children when they're in the hospital because they weren't necessarily both, you know, of the traditional family unit. I think that certainly shows that times are changing and have evolved, and the 40-year-old law that's defined families has finally evolved in Rhode Island.
And it needs to, because the world changes, and you want to make sure that, and we had conversations about this way back when we talked about the Marriage Equality Act and all of those types of things, that you have to look at the world you're living in and adapt the laws to be able to follow the changes in the world that you live in. And so you need to make those changes. And there are other things that I think down the road that they need to look at too. For instance, I'll give you a quick one. DCYF, if you have two parents of children, maybe married, maybe not, who have issues and can't deal with their children, and then the grandparents can become involved and take care of those children, they don't have a right to be heard at those DCYF hearings.
That was another example.
They should.
Yes. And there are kinship families now that might even include that a teacher had taken on that child who was in some traumatic situation and rescued. And now there is now a more extended definition of what a non-traditional family is, but certainly they're serving a very important purpose. In Massachusetts also, the medical leave, that has also been expanded. Clearly, the nature of families and how they operate is changing, and for the better, Massachusetts is responding to how to deal with family leave.
And very quickly, I saw that several states have asked their employers to tax at 0.5% or something their employees to create a fund for people who can't work due to illness or injury. And I'm thinking, wait, that's TDI. Rhode Island's had that for quite some time.
Good
Not
point.
every state does.
Apparently some of this also is including now if you happen to have your life change so that you're taking care of a child who's ill or a senior in your home who's ill. Certainly much more responsive laws are evolving. We thank you for tuning in to the most recent changes in 2021. There'll be more taking place. Please stay tuned to The Law Matters. It matters to you.